Imagine this scenario. You are the lone white guy in one of the most hazardous gangs in Memphis. You've repeatedly demonstrated your worth. Yet you're caught off guard on video and Pooh Shiesty himself removes you from Choppa Gang. That is precisely what occurred with White Grape and Man. This narrative is completely insane. Most folks assume gang devotion is unbreakable, but what occurs when your ethnicity makes you disposable? White Grape shifted from being Choppa Gang's top enforcer to being personally ousted by Pooh Shiesty following a single mistake, and his subsequent actions will stun you. Known also as artist Pooh Shiesty will remain detained for now. We are discussing a guy who felt so slighted by his leader that he committed a homicide just to demonstrate he wasn't weak. This isn't merely some neighborhood gossip. This is about the reality of racial dynamics even in the hood, and how Pooh Shiesty's choice to abandon White Grape resulted in fatal outcomes. From the theft footage that triggered Pooh Shiesty's response to White Grape's lethal attempt at a comeback, this entire event reveals the harsh reality regarding loyalty in the streets. So, if you wish to comprehend how Pooh Shiesty's executive choice transformed a white kid from Memphis into a homicide defendant and why the Choppa Gang chief had to make the toughest call of his life, you should stay tuned until the conclusion because this tale gets more intense with every fact. Tap the subscribe and like buttons and let's jump in.
I'm not a rap, alright? If y'all think this on some rap beat shit or we rapping or going back and forth, I'm through. I retire. I ain't making no more.
Before we explore White Grape's narrative, we must understand the origins of Choppa Gang and their true nature. See, Pooh Shiesty didn't simply wake up and initiate a gang on a whim. This group was created by necessity within the perilous neighborhoods of South Memphis. Raised in the Cane Creek apartments, Pooh Shiesty was surrounded by brutality from the start. His father, known as Mob Boss, was heavily involved in street life and even established a music label named Mob Ties Records. However, that lifestyle caught up with him fast. He was imprisoned for assisting in a homicide when Pooh was only a youngster. That is the setting that molded a young Pooh Shiesty. When Pooh entered high school at Central High, he began connecting with other young earners who wanted to get paid by any means. The primary partner was Big 30 from Whitehaven, along with individuals like Little Hank, Antoine, and several others. They named themselves Choppa Gang because they always carried rifles, and that title just stuck. Now, let me list the key members for you. You have Big 30, who is Pooh's closest associate and was actually the first to sign a major contract with Moneybagg Yo. Then there's Big Scare, who is Pooh's relative and a creator of Double R. This guy was strictly street-oriented until he unexpectedly went viral from a reaction clip. Choppa Gang Hank is currently detained for an attempted homicide. He allegedly fired at a vehicle and paralyzed a person in a situation of mistaken identity. And Choppa member is incarcerated for murder in 2 attempts. These aren't typical street guys. These are proven killers who established their status through aggression and intimidation in Memphis. But here's the intriguing part. They allowed a white male into their inner circle, and that choice would eventually come back to haunt them. To comprehend Choppa Gang's conflicts, you must understand Memphis street geography. This city is partitioned by railroad tracks that effectively isolate different neighborhoods and factions. You have North Memphis, South Memphis, and East Memphis, and every region has its own groups that have been feuding for decades. Choppa Gang, being southern-based, naturally had conflicts with groups from the north. The primary feud that made them famous was with EBG, that is the organization, including Idjizil and his associates. This rivalry dates back to high school when Pooh Shiesty and Idjizil attended Central High together, though they represented opposite sides of the tracks. The conflict truly intensified when Pooh released Back in Blood featuring Lil Durk. In that song, he was speaking straight to EBG, saying, "Yeah, you know who took that from you? Come get it back in blood." He was alluding to a particular event where Choppa Gang reportedly raided EBG's location and stole their firearms. That verse wasn't just music, it was an actual warning.
Outside, cuz. I want you to just say what you just said on that status in my face. Come on, just do that. Just do that for me, please. Where you at? Get them on here, y'all. I ain't gonna lie though, on some real shit, I gotta keep it so 100. I ain't never like you, cuz. I ain't gonna lie, I ain't never like your bitch ass.
See, I try to give you a pass with Shiesty, cuz.
Whopping 30 trying to give your bitch ass a pass. I never liked you. You know I ain't like.
EBG countered with their own version wearing CGK sweatshirts. That abbreviation represents Choppa Gang Killer. They even featured Quando Rando in their clip to take shots at Lil Durk. This rivalry became so intense that Idjizil was eventually shot 3 times in the arm just days after releasing his diss track. But before the EBG conflict, Pooh had issues with Big Boogie from North Memphis. That predicament became so volatile that Big Boogie's show in Mississippi was targeted. Over 50 rounds were discharged. 2 individuals died, including Bogey's associate Jazzman, who was on the stage with him. That is the degree of brutality we are discussing regarding these. Now, Let's discuss White Grape, whose legal name is Kenny. This guy was unique from the start. Being raised white in South Memphis, he had to validate himself daily just to get by. While other kids his age were concerned with schoolwork and gaming, White Grape was in the streets attempting to gain respect from people who instantly thought he was soft due to his race. White Grape attended Central High School alongside Pooh Shiesty and the rest of the crew. Even then, he was famous for having many girls around him constantly. The guy had major charisma, but more significantly, he was prepared to do street work when necessary. See, White Grape wasn't just some kid from the suburbs playing tough. He was genuinely from a hard background, genuinely about that lifestyle. But in Memphis, particularly within the black community, there is an automatic belief that white guys cannot be threatening. People observe the skin tone and assume an easy mark rather than seeing the individual underneath. That is exactly what occurred with White Grape. Even though he was putting in effort for Choppa Gang, even though he was ready to fight for his friends, many people in that world didn't view him seriously. They saw a white guy and thought he was a target. White Grape eventually joined the Grape Street Crips while remaining a part of Choppa Gang. The process was violent. They beat him severely and took photos that went viral throughout Memphis. You could witness his face completely bruised and bloodied, but he endured it like a warrior. That should have sufficed to prove he was truly about that life. But apparently, it wasn't. This is where everything collapsed for White Grape. One day, he was out in the neighborhood doing business when some guys decided to challenge him. They saw a white male with a weapon and cash and thought it would be a simple theft. They were completely wrong about the simple part, but they still caught him off guard. According to street reports, these guys approached White Grape and immediately turned violent. One of them hit him with his own pistol, striking him while the others searched his pockets. They took his firearm, his cash, everything. But here's the wild part. Someone was filming the entire event. The footage shows White Grape being totally degraded. These guys weren't merely robbing him, they were shaming him. They were aware he was Choppa Gang. They knew he was supposed to be an enforcer, and they intended to humiliate him and his entire group. They struck him with his own gun, mocking him the whole time, ensuring everyone could see they just robbed one of Pooh Shiesty's associates. When that footage hit the internet, it went everywhere. In Memphis, your status is everything. If you are caught slipping like that, especially on video, it impacts your whole group. People began doubting Choppa Gang's toughness. How can you have a white guy in your gang who can't even defend himself? How can you call yourselves enforcers when your own member is being robbed and struck with his own pistol? The disrespect was massive. People were mocking White Grape, saying he never belonged in the gang. They were claiming Choppa Gang was getting weak, recruiting anyone just because they needed bodies. The clip was being reposted everywhere: Instagram, Facebook, group chats, and every time it was seen, it made Choppa Gang appear more vulnerable. When Pooh Shiesty learned about the theft and viewed that clip, he was incredibly angry. This wasn't just about White Grape being robbed. This was about the status of his whole brand. In the streets, image is everything. And the image was that Choppa Gang was fragile enough to let their members be shamed on video. Pooh had to decide, and he acted fast. White Grape had to leave.
3, 4 in the morning. Look at my phone. I put something out on me. I said, look at my phone again. He text me again.
It didn't matter that he had contributed before. The reality that he was caught lacking, and it was all documented, meant he was now a burden to the group. The order came down quickly. White Grape was formally removed from Choppa Gang. They severed all connections with him, rejecting him entirely. In their view, he had brought embarrassment to the crew, and there was no recovery from that. This is the street's reality. Allegiance only lasts so long, and when you become a problem, you are discarded. For White Grape, this must have been heartbreaking. These weren't just gang associates. They were his kin. He had gambled everything for Choppa Gang, endured beatings, risked his life, and now they were tossing him aside because he slipped up once. But here is the thing about that life. Once you're involved, you can never truly exit. White Grape might have been ousted from Choppa Gang, but he remained in Memphis, still had to survive, still had to earn, and now he had even more to validate because everyone viewed him as vulnerable. After being removed from Choppa Gang, White Grape had to plan his next step. He couldn't just vanish. He still had to live in Memphis, still had to generate income, still had to handle the same hazardous environment that had already proven they didn't respect him. So he returned to what he knew, dealing. White Grape began selling drugs again, trying to establish his own business without Choppa's backing. This was extremely risky because now he was alone, and everyone knew he had been cast out by one of the city's most feared groups. The neighborhood was watching White Grape intently. Some people sympathized with him, feeling he was treated unfairly by Choppa Gang. Others saw him as a target now that he lacked support, and some were just waiting to see his response. Would he crumble under the strain, or would he show he was truly about that life? White Grape opted to validate himself, but that choice would cost him everything. He was set on showing Memphis that being white didn't make him soft. He was weary of people assuming he couldn't protect himself, weary of being viewed as fragile, weary of being slighted due to his race. The irony is that White Grape's biggest issue wasn't his capability, it was other people's views of him. He had already shown he could work, already shown he was willing to take chances for his group. But in a city like Memphis, where status is everything and racial views are deep, image often outweighs reality. White Grape's drive to validate himself would eventually end in disaster. He was out dealing, trying to restore his status and his finances, when another set of guys decided to challenge him. But this time, White Grape was prepared. According to accounts, White Grape was in Binghamton, attempting a drug transaction when some individuals from West Memphis arrived. They carried forged currency and were trying to scam him. When White Grape noticed the money was fake, the situation turned hostile very fast. Now, in a typical case, this might have just been a dispute or perhaps a brawl. But White Grape had a point to prove. He had been robbed previously, shamed on camera, ousted from his gang, and insulted because of his background. He wasn't going to let it happen twice. When these guys tried to trick him with forged cash, White Grape viewed it as another attempt to mock him for being white. In his head, they were testing him just like the previous group, assuming he was a soft mark because of his race. But this time, he was ready to show them they were mistaken. The situation escalated rapidly. White Grape drew his weapon and began firing. One of the guys from West Memphis was killed, and now White Grape was facing homicide counts. Just like that, his future was gone. He went from being a Choppa gang member to being ousted to being a murder defendant, all because he felt compelled to prove he wasn't weak. The strange part is that this whole mess could have been avoided if people had just respected White Grape initially. If the streets had appraised him by his deeds instead of his skin, if Choppa gang had backed him after the theft, if society hadn't made him feel he constantly had to display his toughness, perhaps that individual would still be breathing today. Let's be honest about what truly occurred here. White Grape's narrative is ultimately about prejudice and how it impacts everyone, even in the hood. We talk frequently about how white people stereotype black people as scary, but we don't discuss enough how black people sometimes stereotype white people as fragile. White Grape was constantly facing people who assumed he couldn't defend himself because he was white. Even in his own gang, even after proving himself many times, there was always this lingering doubt about whether he was truly and when he was robbed, instead of backing him like they would have backed a black associate, Choppa gang discarded him instantly. Think about it. If Big 30 or Big Scare had been robbed on video, would Pooh Shiesty have ousted them? Unlikely. They would have viewed it as a minor hurdle, something to overcome. But since White Grape was white, the robbery was taken as proof of what some already thought, that he didn't belong in that world. This type of logic is hazardous for everyone involved. When we make guesses about people based on race, we build scenarios where individuals feel they must overcompensate. White Grape felt he constantly had to prove he was tough enough, scary enough, street enough. That stress eventually pushed him to make a choice that ruined his life and ended another's. The streets don't value your race when gunfire starts. A white guy with a weapon is as lethal as anyone else with a weapon. But social views made White Grape feel he had to prove that repeatedly, and that drive to prove himself is what caused his downfall. Currently, White Grape is facing homicide charges and looking at possibly spending his entire life in a cell. All because he felt he had to prove he wasn't weak. All because people couldn't look past his race to see he was truly about that life. Meanwhile, Choppa gang has continued without him. Pooh is facing his own legal battles, with federal charges for several shootings. Big 30 is detained on drug counts. The whole group is essentially collapsing, but White Grape's narrative has been lost in the mess. The person he killed had family, had people who cared for them, had a life that was ended because of a drug transaction gone bad. That is the actual disaster here. Not just what occurred to White Grape, but what occurred to his victim. A life was taken over forged bills and damaged ego. This entire event demonstrates how toxic street life can be, particularly when combined with racial views and the constant drive to prove yourself. White Grape thought he needed to kill someone to prove he wasn't fragile, but all he really demonstrated was that brutality only generates more brutality. White Grape's narrative is a warning about many things, about the risks of street life, about the pressure to validate yourself, about how racial views can damage everyone involved. But most significantly, it's a narrative about how fast everything can vanish when you're in that world. One day, White Grape was a valued member of one of Memphis's most feared crews. The next day, he was being robbed on video. A few months later, he was kicked out of the crew, and now he's facing homicide charges. That is how quickly the streets can turn against you. The most tragic part is that none of this was necessary. If people had appraised White Grape by his character instead of his skin, if Choppa gang had displayed more allegiance, if he had stepped away from that drug deal instead of trying to make a point, everyone involved would be better off now. But that isn't how the streets function. In that world, image is everything. Status is gained through violence, and one error can cost you everything. White Grape understood that lesson the painful way, and now he is paying the maximum price. What do you all think of this narrative? Was Choppa gang wrong to oust White Grape? Should he have walked away from that transaction? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and ensure you subscribe for more content like this. Until next time, stay safe out there.